Is suffering needed for enlightenment? Hey guys, it's John sitting here in my living room on a beautiful, very, very cold day. It's 18 degrees outside right now. Very cold outside. I'm sitting here drinking a warm mug of broth, nursing my throat back to health. I wanted to hop on and talk about this idea of suffering leading to enlightenment. We have life experiences. Do we need to suffer? The Buddhists quote, "Life is suffering," is an interesting quote because there's a schism in the quote. The original language is a conceptual language, English is a literal language, and the word that translates to suffering has three meanings in English. And when you combine the three as a concept, like the original language would have done, the quote is not life is suffering. The quote is life is suffering because of our habitual response to our past experience. It comes back to this idea that we are habitually responding. Where the schism lies in this is that life is suffering is an absolute. There's no way out of that statement. But life is suffering because of our habitual response to our past experience means there's a habit we can change. Means within that habitual habit that we're creating suffering, we can change the habit of the beliefs that come from our subconscious mind and our past experience. And that's what it really comes down to, is putting your past down and leaving it behind. Now, can we find this in biblical teaching? Sure, we can. Yeah. You must become as a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. You must be born again. Both of these say go back to a time before you had those experiences, before you had those beliefs. Come back to a space of just a blank slate in front of you. Every moment is a moment of potential. Every moment is a moment of creation. And every moment is waiting for you to make a choice. Am I going to believe these things from my past and expect something negative in my future? Or am I going to clear the slate and bring my time right to here in the present and declare something different and believe something different and choose to create an outcome that is more to my liking? You do not have to suffer. And it's so funny when somebody drops into their own dogmatic ideologies, they will argue that you have to. I had a Buddhist come on here one time and tell me, "You're suffering right now, John." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm not suffering. I'm drinking my coffee and having a grand old time on my back deck. I am loving my life. I'm not suffering at all. At all." But he kept arguing and arguing that I was lying and that I was wrong and that I'm suffering. And I'm not. I am not suffering. He is. And you could tell he's suffering because he has to argue that he's suffering. He has to argue that everybody else is suffering with him. That's the concept of this. Suffering is an idea. Suffering is a subjective idea that each one of us choose. I am choosing to be a victim of my past. I am choosing to live into this ideology that I must suffer to become enlightened. The reality of it is there is no must. You have a choice to do whatever you want. If you don't want to be enlightened, don't be enlightened. If you don't want to be looking into your spirituality, don't look into your spirituality. But the concept that you have to suffer is absolutely a fallacy. And I say this because Buddha himself said, the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. When you are fearless, you are not suffering. When you are fearless, you are creating from a joyful place. You are reaching nirvana, right? You are coming to that place of paradise. There's no suffering in paradise, right? Now, they're going to say, yeah, but that's the enlightenment part we're talking about. The eradication of fear. You are suffering. Life is suffering, right? Life is suffering if you choose to be suffering. Life is suffering if you choose to be a reaction zero instead of an action hero. Life is suffering if you choose to be a victim of life's experiences. You can create in every given moment because every given moment is the pinpoint of creation. You are the one who is creating it. And when you focus your life and declare your life as suffering, you're going to suffer. This person who is coming out at me hard about suffering, think about what he was doing. He was arguing, he was fighting, he was struggling with the fact that I was not suffering. He was trying to prove himself right by saying that I didn't even know what I was talking about. You are suffering, John. You are suffering. No, I'm not. I'm not suffering. Life is life, and I choose the way I live it, and I live joyfully. I get up every morning and I sit in love, and I drink my coffee on the back deck, and I enjoy that moment of life. I go to the store and I smile at people, and they smile back. I'm not suffering in any way, shape, or form. You don't need to suffer in life. If you're suffering, you're further away from enlightenment because you are succumbing to the stimulus of the world rather than being free of the stimulus and living into a world that you of your choosing. I don't suffer, and I'm not suffering. If you come and try to tell me that I am suffering, I just look at you in sorrow for you because you're suffering. I'm not suffering. And when you go to someone and tell them that they are suffering and they tell you you're not, and you say, yes, you are suffering, you don't sound like you're touching reality because you don't get to choose what that person's doing. You may look at that world and say, that person is suffering. Suffering is a subjective choice. And when you look at that subjective choice and you decide for yourself that you've created a life of absolute misery because you've chosen to suffer and that you have to go through this suffering to get to that that nirvana or that enlightenment, every moment you can create something different. Every moment you can choose to be joyful. Every moment. There are moments where things maybe seem to be going crazy in the world, and you don't have to succumb to the suffering. You can look at those moments joyfully. I stood up at my mom's funeral and I was giving the eulogy. The first lines I said was, I said, when my mom turned 40, my father told her he was going to trade her in for 220s. And my mom spun around and said, Dick, you're not wired for 220. Right? I was at my mom's funeral. Was I suffering? No. I was joyfully living my mom and her personality and her humor. I was joyfully not suffering. I was joyfully expressing how beautiful she was in her wit. You know, you can be in the one of the worst moments of your life, but whether you suffer in that moment is a choice of your own. And quite honestly, the eradication of fear that Buddha talks about, when you do that, you're not suffering. So suffering is not necessary for enlightenment. Choice is, belief is. And when you choose to believe that you are broadening your awareness into a greater understanding of your oneness with God, then you get to experience that because that is the belief that you've chosen, and that belief is created. Whatever you ask in God's name is granted if you have faith. I am enjoying my greater awareness of myself and my oneness with God. Guess what? That's enlightenment. You know what enlightenment is? People will look at it as the light show and the big spiritual experience and all that stuff. And this enlightenment is setting everything down and getting lighter, coming back to your space, no suffering, none of that stuff. And when someone's trying to argue that you're suffering, they don't understand Buddhism because that's the Buddha said. Secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. So let go of the fear. All suffering comes from fear, right? We don't have to be fearful. We don't have to be fearful. And when you choose not to suffer, you don't suffer. Suffering is a dogmatic choice. Drop the dogma, live the love. And that's my thought on this. You guys have a great day. And I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.